play. And we're going to need more and more materials. We're going to need more and more drainage systems, so on and so forth, being installed. If we don't have the right thinking around these infrastructure challenges, we might have an actual issue going forward. And the conversation was quite exciting because we touched on it from multiple perspectives. I remember one interesting one around, is Nigeria an informal settlement?
Why are you being politically correct? The question was, is Nigeria a slum?
The technical word is informal settlement.
And the consensus seemed to have suggested that, well, it was a yes, but we couldn't say it loudly.
It's not politically correct. But the idea being, I can have my 7-bedroom mansion in Nigeria, but to get to it is that if there are 2 cars coming from the opposite direction, it's a staring match until one of you decides to back out and the other one comes in. And so these were some of the issues. I remember one particular statistic that caught my eye was architect Robert, when he was saying that back in 1990, when he was starting practice, land surveyors were leading the planning conversation, and the idea was 3 meters is sufficient. I think they hadn't planned for Mpenkonis. So the idea is that if you now have 2 people of capacity with their Mpenkonis coming down the road, 3 meters is not sufficient.
Yeah.
So these are little planning issues we had from developers like NSSF and Goji Group, who is actually supporting NSSF on the Temangalo project, for example, but also who have done work with Buganda Kingdom and the Mirembe Villas Estate and Mirembe Villas Chigo. And these 2 developers were sharing real war stories from the front lines, what it actually takes to plan this. And it reminded me of the morning conversation where Gerald, the CIO of NSSF, the Chief Investment Officer of NSSF, was giving us some perspective on, we had some of these plans back in 2012. We're in 2022. And the issues have been that, is that planning context that we had in 2012 still relevant even at this point today? Right. So interesting perspective altogether, which I think now sets us up for today. Today should be fun.
Yeah, it definitely should, and we're looking forward to that. Thank you very much, Arthur, as we get ready. So today, the thing that stood out for me, you hear this all the time, we see it in the news, the stats are thrown around, but when you begin to think about it a bit more in detail, in the context of how disorganized we tend to be as a country, no offense to us, it shows you why we need to have these conversations. The thing you said, so it wasn't yesterday, it wasn't for us in 1986, it was 1990. In 1990, half of the people watching us were not born, right?
The reality, yes.
And in another 20, 30 years, it's going to be double the number that we have at the moment, the same amount of land, right? So the pressure on this land is increasing. The need to be, climate smart, to be a bit more sensitive to what we're doing with the environment, but also affordability becomes even more important, which is why the discussions today about the connected system and what we do with data, which is now the new gold, and what we're doing with that. Right?
Indeed. And you've just touched on it spot on there, right? Today, almost 8 in 10 Ugandans is 30 years and below. And that's just going to exacerbate. We have a massive demographic dividend that we can exploit as a country to take charge of the next 20, 40 years globally, right? I think there's another statistic that by 2050, almost 7 in 10 people on the planet will be Africans. You get the idea, and young Africans at that. So massive opportunity for us, right? Yeah. But where are these young people going to live? Where do they call home? Especially because their incomes don't necessarily match with, for example, the minimum amount of monthly household income I need to have to qualify for a mortgage. So urgent problem.
If you think about it from a positive side, though, Athan, we want to try and be as positive as possible. These 8 out of 10 Ugandans who are under 30 have aspirations and ambitions. And if we do manage to hit our targets for Vision 2040 and end up being a proper middle-income country, all of these young people are going to have enough money
framing for why National Planning Authority becomes a key stakeholder in this conversation is that if you're the custodian of vision we're trying to build, I saw that they're trying to get us to a point where we've moved from a peasant economy to a middle-income economy by within the next 30 years, right? So if you're in that kind of a context, it means we need to be practical and prudent in how we approach the constraints today, but also as we prepare for tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
These young people are I think one saddening statement yesterday that got me to go back was when they said that, it's people in informal settlements, people who are customers for social housing, who are actually subsidizing our lifestyles. I took that back. But to me, it's also an innovation opportunity. How do we find them the right kind of housing? And today's conversation should help us to unpack that in a bit more detail.
Right. Well, thank you very much. I think that sets a perfect tone. Arthur Mukembo, Executive Producer for the NBS Housing Baraza, thank you so much.
Thanks, Ben.
Which then gets us to where we need to start now, and the discussion around a connected ecosystem. One of the things that came out in our session yesterday afternoon was the fact that Ugandans don't want to use professionals for building. It seems to be based on the perception that it's a lot more expensive, even though we heard that in the long run, it actually ends up being more expensive if you try to do things on your own as opposed to using professionals. We had the perspective of the architects yesterday and some of the developers. Today, we start by hearing from the engineers, who as always are at the heart of anything to do with construction. And we're going to start our morning session by getting some wonderful insights and a masterclass from the president of the Uganda Institution of Professional Engineers, who is going to come and share some great insights. And then when he's done, we'll try and decipher what he's telling us and get some ideas and build around that. And we want you to be a part of that conversation. Again, I will remind you, our hashtag NBS Housing Baraza. Would like you to get in touch with us and share your thoughts. Remember to use that hashtag NBS Housing Baraza, so we can be able to hear from each other and see what we can do to make our housing ecosystem a lot better. So for now, please join me in welcoming the president of the Uganda Institute of Professional Engineers, Engineer Andrew Muhwezi, to get us started on day 2 of the NBS Housing Baraza.
Thank you very much, Ben, and good morning to our audience as well as the online audience. As I've already been introduced, I'm Engineer Andrew Muhwezi, the president of the Uganda Institution of Professional Engineers. I'm very excited to be here this morning, and I want to thank NBS for organizing this important topical matter that touches the lives of every Ugandan, small and big. And the NBS is doing a good job, because creating awareness is one big variable within this housing equation. And you'll agree with me that right from the early stages of education, we are told the basic needs of man, the basic needs of human beings. You have food, you have shelter, you also have clothes. So today, we are talking about the shelter. And as we also shown yesterday during the introductory session, when you go to the pyramid of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you'll also find that housing is part of the strong foundation of that pyramid. So whichever way you look at it, whether at the early formative stages of life, or even as you reach the evening of your lives, we are talking about a basic human need. But we are moving from just talking about a human need to also saying, is this human need affordable? Is it also decent? So we are really not just talking about any house. It should be affordable, it should be decent. And from the affordability perspective, we are saying you should be able to acquire this house or own it without foregoing the other basic human needs, including medical and other needs that facilitate our day-to-day life. But also, it should be decent, meaning within that house or home, you also have access to the essentials, the essential services. For instance, if you have a house and it doesn't have a sanitary facility, it is still a house. But how do you respond to nature's call? But having said that, let's look at the problem. What is the problem that is actually making this a point of focus? The National Planning Authority policy paper brought up very interesting statistics. Probably statistics which may not have been appreciated by people until they have read that paper. Part of the problem we are seeing, the housing ecosystem, the interconnected linkages of actors, systems, and processes. There are gaps between the interfaces. Something is already being done there, but there are gaps. And because of those gaps, we are talking about a cumulative housing deficit of 2.2 million housing units, which is growing at an annual rate of 284,000 units. So the deficit is growing. And because the deficit is growing, we are moving from, we are not talking about a housing, we're not talking about emergency housing, we're actually now talking about a housing emergency. And this is on either side, both in the rural and in the urban. But we saw from the statistics that it is actually a little bit more in the urban for obvious reasons, because rural-urban migration is a reality. People move from the rural areas to the urban, hoping for greener pastures. Although sometimes you may find that the pastures are actually brown as well. They are not always green in the urban. So as a result of that, you have, I think, about 44,000 more deficit for the urban than the rural. And it is important to recognize that the demand for those houses cannot go down because the population is not going down either. So this is a problem which we must now confront with courage, because it is not going away anytime soon. We have to deal with it. But the interesting thing is that when you do some search for information, in Uganda we are talking about affordable and decent housing. You go to Kenya, they are talking about affordable and decent housing. You go to other countries, Rwanda, Nigeria, across the globe, because there is always that segment of the population which is yet to reach there. So with that narrative, of the problem, we now need to look at what then can we do? What are the issues? And the theme of the day is talking about building a strong housing ecosystem, partnering to house generations. The ecosystem is a key word, interconnectivity of different actors. And also, we want to partner to house generations. It therefore means that we must provide sustainable solutions. That's why, as I indicated, something is already being done. But the gap is the existing solutions. Are they scalable? And how fast are they scalable? Because for a deficit of 284,000 houses, it means that we must build 778 units every day to avoid having that deficit. Maybe it is possible, but why then are we not doing it? I think we'll be able to see as we progress in the discussion. So we must do something about it in order to build a strong ecosystem. And there are 3 dimensions about what we can do. The first dimension is recognize the times we are in today, or the times we are in the present times. We have now the reality of climate change. This is no longer in the future. It's already with us. And therefore, whatever actions we are taking, whether in the building of infrastructure, whether in other spheres, we have to think about resilience. How resilient is the infrastructure we are putting up? But resilience is not built as an afterthought. Resilience is built right from the planning stage. And we recognize that because of the gaps in the interfaces among different actors, the housing value chain has little been reversed. Because ordinarily, the logical sequence, you should plan, service, build, and occupy. But what is happening, because of those gaps among the different actors, you plan, you build, you occupy, then you start thinking about services. But recognize that the service providers, unless you are speaking to them from the beginning, they may not have your development on their agenda. As we shall see what happens when you start bringing linkages within the different actors in the ecosystem. So resilience has to be built from the beginning at the planning level. And we have recognized that largely we are not so much inclined to community arrangements. People largely want to be, they develop their project from their perspective. But with the pressure on land, especially say in the urban areas, if you go to the slum communities, if you go to the high density places, it becomes obvious that you can no longer develop your project based on your individual thinking. You must also think about the surroundings. Otherwise, you are going to build a house which is either difficult for you to access or which is going to constrain a neighbor from accessing their own house. So, within this dimension of climate smart, what are the issues? You have issues around energy access. You have issues around green buildings. You have issues around the environment. So it's a whole nexus. If you talk about affordability, it's not only the capital cost of putting up the house. It is also the cost of you living in that house until such a time when you can no longer live in it. So for instance, you'll find that you still have cases where somebody has put up a house, but it is so dark inside the house, even during the day. And then you are going to spend a lot of money on electricity bills because even during the day you must have your lights on. And there is also a growing appetite for paving compounds. We really pave these compounds. And when you now have a community setup, you know, the rains now, they are so unpredictable that the seasons we used to receive the rains are not the same seasons. And when the rains finally arrive, they arrive with such intensity that if you do not create exit for that runoff, it's going to find where it can go. So, you imagine you have a community where you have paved all the spaces. But in your planning of the evacuation system, the drainage, you just thought only about yourself. Just thought about yourself. And because everybody has paved, the runoff is competing for the limited capacity of the drainage systems. So what happens? You have a build-up. And when you have this build-up, eventually you have floods. You have your sitting rooms flooded. You have the bedrooms flooded. Now, given the density around community settlements, you also have a lot of mobility. Again, from the individualistic perspective, you will have everybody wanting to drive their car, which is understandable. But the fact that you have large settlements within the same location, it means that until such a time when we have gone, say, to green vehicles, you are going also to have a lot of emissions as people go about their day-to-day business. So this is where now we shall see within the interconnectivity among the different actors in the ecosystem, what can be done? Because these are the issues of the nexus around the climate issues. Paving, you do not create sponge points where this runoff can be absorbed. And therefore it has found its way, and then you have homes being flooded. You also have human behavior, that some of the drainage systems constructed, they'll be clogged with some plastics and this kind of thing. That also brings another dimension. Then, you do not foresee that you will need water reliability. So you forget to put up a rainwater harvesting system. So it's very important that as we look at the other dimensions, we reflect on some of the little issues which we can actually do at individual level as we develop our spaces. And what can be done? What can be done? Because we see the deficit of housing is more in the urban than in the rural. So what can be done? There is need for decongestion. The growth of the urban centers is now more on the outskirts. I think I've read somewhere where now the northern bypass is no longer a bypass as it used to be, because it is now in the middle of establishments. So what that means is that most of the city, most of the urban centers, not just Kampala alone, you are growing in the outskirts. And it means that the people in the outskirts should have everything they would want, right from amenities to places of leisure, where they can access all services they would ordinarily access. And during the COVID pandemic, it became obvious that even the work policies must be looked at. So you'll find that some institutions have now thought about working from home for jobs which can be done remotely. So among the things which have to be thought about as you plan the development of these communities, housings, is also to look at the digital connectivity of where people are going to settle, so that you do not have routine mass movement from remote sites again back into the city. So also look at that aspect of digital connectivity. Now, to realize some of those actions, you must look at now the other dimension, a connected housing ecosystem. Because that's what's now going to deliver the sustainability for generations. But who are the players? Who are the players within this ecosystem? You have the homeowners. You also have the local communities. You have the local administration. You have the regulator. You have real estate dealers. You have utility service providers. You also have people who are providing security. So there are different actors, multiple actors. But the question is, are these actors speaking together? There was an interesting data point which was being discussed yesterday. How wide should be the roads within the estates? Somebody pointed out there is a default arrangement of 10 foot. I cross-checked that data point again, and I confirmed from the planning guidelines, should actually be 8 meters. That's about 26 feet. So if you have an estate which has roads of 10 foot, it means that you are going to have problems of mobility. Cars, for instance, cannot bypass each other, and you'll have also quite some problems with establishing proper drainage systems for such roads. So 26 feet is the guideline. But you are going to find, because the different actors are not necessarily speaking to each other, you are going to find where people are now even encroaching on that 10 feet which has been left. And what happens is that you have a very nice house which cannot be accessed by yourself. So the different actors, how can they speak to each other? What are the risks? If you are an estate developer putting up an estate, normally they advertise fully serviced plots with water and electricity. And you go with that anticipation, because they're advertising in the newspapers. You go with that anticipation, even buy the plot without asking. And then you find that actually the services are not there. So it again takes you back to how the housing value chain has been reversed. You plan, build, occupy, and then you talk about services. So it's very important that housing owners, especially those who are developing these houses at mass scale, like institutional developers, make it part of their planning processes to speak with utility service providers, the road network providers, so that they plan, they put you in their planning horizon. The people, once they have occupied the plots or started developing the plots in that estate which is unserviced, it piles unnecessary animosity between the occupants and utility service providers. Yet, what should have been done is, can you work with them? Can you work with the utility service providers so that you get the right service levels delivered to that housing estate? It should be, ordinarily it should have been supply chasing demand. In other words, the services should arrive first, then the facilities are developed to consume those services. But of course, there are many dimensions to delivery of these services which constrain these utilities. So it now becomes a question of, as these different actors work together, what are the risks? What are the risks? There is likely to be a breakdown in collaboration, especially if the community developers, the housing developers, are coming so late into the equation. There's likely to be a breakdown because there are always many competing pressures. While you have put your estate, there's also another developer who is putting up the estate in need of the same service. And the resources can never be inexhaustible. So there is that risk of breakdown in collaboration. You also have interdependencies can cause challenges in planning, especially if one of the actors in the ecosystem provides inaccurate data or does not meet the timelines. And also the other risk, you have a challenge of realigning the cultures of the different players. Even if utility service providers did their part, even if the local administration did their part, but how about the developers? What is their thinking? What is their mindset? In as far as taking into consideration the wider community good is concerned. So there are those risks. And of course the mitigation, the global mitigation intervention is that the different actors must work together. How can they work together? We need enabling legislation where you can facilitate public-private partnerships. For instance, as you develop communities, as you develop housing estates, you recognize that some of the facilities, instead of being developed by the communities, are better left to, say, government or the local administration to deal with. But also, since this housing deficit affects everybody, it is expected that the government takes it as a priority in the planning horizon and provides all the expected services. We normally focus more on aspects of utilities, but how about the security of the estates? It is common to find that each of the housing within the estate probably have to put up their own security arrangement, security guard or some sort of that arrangement. But where you have mass concentrations of people, it is important that, for instance, you have a police outpost which can provide the much needed security services. We are also able to see in the previous discussions that funding is not always the problem. Somebody from the NSSF yesterday talked about the fund, the issue is not funding, the issue is dealing with the procedures, but also ensuring that you deliver the housing unit at a price which is affordable. Based on the statistics, we saw that only 4% of Ugandans, based on the average incomes, the median incomes, only 4% can afford a house with a unit price over 100 million. Otherwise, according to the incomes, most people would afford houses in the range of, say, 12 to 24 million. So this brings in now the other aspect. When we are developing the institutional players are active more in the urban. But in the countryside, the people also need decent and affordable housing. So you'll find that most of the players in the countryside are actually self-developers. And this will bring us to the other dimension of within this ecosystem, how do we deal with the issue of cost of materials? How do we deal with the issue of cost of developments? Because the issues which are causing, affecting affordability were clearly elaborated. You have costs of land, you have costs of materials, but the materials are even more specific. You also have counterfeit materials, which in the long run, because you see, if you are developing and then the house is collapsing, overall you are going to lose. it automatically makes the project more expensive. Or you'll have more material inputs. If you are supposed to use an iron bar of 6 meters, but what's in the market is 5.5, but being priced low, it automatically means that you are going to use more iron bars in your project. And that will make the project more expensive. So at that point, what should be done? That's why we encourage developers work with professionals. Because the professionals, they take liability for the project you have given them. And part of the requirements, as part of the duty of care, is that the professional, for instance, must take materials to the laboratory for testing. I know that in many sites, actually, especially private developers, testing of the materials is like a myth. People say, how much the iron bars? We want these ones of 27,000. But you find actually the authentic iron bars maybe cost 35,000. So people are looking at cheap, not affordable. It goes along those lines. Cheap things are always very expensive. So let the professional do his work. These materials should be taken to testing laboratories. Even the bricks should be tested. The sand should be tested. The iron bars should be tested. And there are all these testing centers. Apart from UNBS, I think we now have about additional 7 other testing centers, including some of the manufacturers. For instance, I'm aware that Roofing offers free testing services for its materials, for all steel materials, whether they are manufactured by them or not, but they have a laboratory which offers free services for testing materials. So the testing gives you the extra assurance, and then you are able to invest your money and get the real return without having to compensate for shortages. And the other aspect we can look at within enabling connectivity within the housing ecosystem, incentives potential investors. Yesterday, URA gave a number of elaborate detail about incentives to the investors. But also, we also look at incentives in terms of where the problems are. If we are dealing with a mass problem of 2.2 million housing units, which is growing at 284,000 units per annum, it means that, for instance, the institutional developers may need extraordinary incentives because their impact is going to be on mass scale. If, for instance, you are looking at the slums, you need some very unique incentives to deal, say, with the issues around the land acquisition, so that the developer can focus more on the above ground costs. So these are aspects where we can have government coming in. Now, with that taken into consideration, we need data. We need data, as I've indicated to you, for us to avoid this deficit from growing further. We need to build at least 778 houses per day. But again, do we really know how many houses are actually built per year? Of course, to put up a house every day, you can imagine completing a house every day. It is not by ordinary means of brick and mortar. It means there has to be some degree of innovation, new methods of construction have to be established. There are alternatives, prefabs, for example. But prefabs, I think there are some now new entries into the market of local manufacture of prefab materials. But otherwise, if you are still importing the materials to construct prefabs, then they cannot be cheaper than the brick and mortar arrangement. So we are not yet there on that one. So what data do we need? And who should provide the data? And who should be the custodian of the data? These are the issues we need to deal with. And who can guarantee the quality of the data? As I have indicated, some of the risks within the interconnectivity, within the ecosystem, is if one of the players gives wrong data, then it's going to distort the whole planning equation. So we are looking at the different types of data which is adequate, which is sufficient for proper housing planning. You have demographic data, age, and this kind of thing. You need the economic data, the average earnings of the people. So if your housing units are only in the range of 100 million plus, and then you have the median earnings in the range of 168,000 to 200,000, then it means that you do not have direct enablers for affordability. It means that somebody now must innovate around the financing value chain. So what types of data? We have the socioeconomic data. You have data around government development plans, public infrastructure. You must know, for instance, where roads are going to pass as you plan the estates, where railway systems are going to pass. You must have data about the construction industry, availability of the materials which you plan to use in the projects. You must have data about related approvals and how you can access the approvals. One of the drivers of construction costs, we saw there was a governance issue. The governance issue. If you are going to take 5 years to get a land title, or to take ages to get your plan approved, then it means that in between, you are going to introduce middlemen who want to facilitate. And that's going to introduce another cost on the developer, which in their profit equation, they will have to put it into consideration. So I'm happy to note, for instance, the National Building Review Board is now digitizing this whole approval process. And the building industry management system will, for instance, enable you to apply for all your plans online, approvals. It will also enable you to get the services of professionals, not introducing now middlemen into the approval. If you are dealing with an engineer, you deal with an engineer online. And this engineer is already in the database. That building industry management system also integrates databases of professional bodies, like the Uganda Institution of Professional Engineers and the Engineers Registration Board. And you are able to access this information, so you can choose your civil engineer, you can choose your mechanical and electrical engineer to work on your project. So you also need data on financing options. We saw in previous discussions how challenging mobilizing development finance for even individual projects is. So it's very important. Among the key data points we should have is who are the players? Maybe who has this access to information? there should also be equity in access to information. For us today, we are here at the Next Media Park and we can get this information. But how about a rural developer? How they get this information? That's why we need to work together, because the media now comes in there very handy to supplement the publicity of the financing institutions. We should also have accurate data about population growth patterns, and also growth patterns among different age demographies. For instance, if you are building, whom are you building for? Are you building for the pensioners? Are you building for the fresh graduates out of school? Are you building for the informal sector? Whom exactly are you building for? So you must know within the development area what proportion in terms of population figures you are planning for. That's why you have a situation where, for instance, you develop houses, but they remain affordable to the would-be target population. Because you thought you had 100,000 of them, but probably you have just 50,000 of them. But what are their needs also? Now the bottom-up approach to the planning also comes in very, very handy. What are the real needs of the people in each age bracket? And how do you deal with that in your planning horizon, in your concept of the projects? You'll find, for instance, the early parents would now be looking for a place where their children can have expansive compound to play from, which is different now from the needs of the pensioners. They may now be looking for a more quiet place. So this kind of social data, qualitative in nature, is also should also be part of these data points which you should look for. But the important thing is that this data shouldn't be picked from everywhere. There should be a central point where you can easily get this information. I'm not sure that UBOS has all these types of data we have talked about, the finest detail. And even if they do, how accessible is it by all the developers who may need? So as part of deepening government support to developing the housing industry, it's very important that access to data should also be much more decentralized. Actually so digitized now with the deep reach of telephone that from my phone I should be able to get all this information from a central database. So that's also very, very important. Because if it is centrally managed, then you have some fair guarantee of quality. There is also data about the professionals. From my review as I prepared for this discussion, I was able to establish that we have 204 engineers who are registered engineers who are available or actively practicing in the building, the housing. So about 150 civil engineers, 30 electrical engineers, and 20 mechanical engineers. Now, if we want to build 778 units per day, that is too much work for that small segment. So even as professional bodies, we have quite a lot of work we have to do, okay? But the advice to the public is that that shouldn't be an excuse for using Kamufus. Yeah, there shouldn't be an excuse for using Kamufus because part of those 778 units are also some are developed largely by the institutional developers, and others are developed, probably a small proportion, by the private developers. So the developers need to safeguard themselves, even with that limitation. And that's why the building industry management system now comes in handy. Because previously, it has been a challenge. Where do you get the engineer you want to use in your project? It is normally from reference of a friend. The person says, this one built my project. You find what he built is probably a small farmhouse. But the project which you need is a 5-story building. And then the person declares, here I am, I'm going to develop your project. You have to do due diligence. But the beams is going to help you with this automatic due diligence. And when somebody says, I'm a structural engineer, they should present to you their practicing license. That's the only validation you can use. So as you do master development, it's also very important to know how many engineers do I have that can be available for my project. And then, by way of conclusion is, how do we take it forward? We have seen the problem is growing. The deficit is not actually coming down. But we must confront it. Otherwise, we are going to have a very, very difficult situation. I've been seeing some media posts, for instance, people declaring that if nothing is done about certain sections of or certain areas within Kampala, then we are going to have a big slum, a city which is a big slum. Well, that commenting is not what we actually need to solve the problem. What we need are the 3 aspects: to recognize there is a problem, to know that the different players must work together, to recognize that there are significant constraints where the private sector cannot work on its own but needs significant support from government by way of enabling certain services, and also incentives to be provided. So you'll find that the informal sector or the informal settlements, the ones you can call the urban poor, I think they are also the rural poor. All these people also need the affordable housing. So we may also need to talk about, especially where you have institutional developers, you give them, government give them certain facilities, land, for example, but subsidizes, but mandates them to subsidize for the urban poor. You also have encouraged more of community settlements than individual settlements, because now that helps that the services which are needed can be delivered from a wholesale point of view. You can imagine if you are to deliver water services, you deliver to one person who is in the range of 5 kilometers from the distribution point. You have to deliver to another person who is 30 kilometers, and in between there is nobody. It's very, very expensive. So we have to encourage, especially in high density places, people living in communities, safeguard developers and avoid some of these indirect costs which are introduced within the housing costs. You'll find that we have to use more of these new facilities being developed, like the building industry management system, and which is now going to help you work with professionals, but also the professionals will have a duty of care to make sure that the materials you get have been taken through appropriate testing centers. We shall also need innovative financing models We had one model presented here yesterday, the Zimba Mpora Mpora, and probably others which are around. You find in the rural areas now you have loan for shelters, loan for solar systems. Those village circles normally do a lot of this. There's also innovation in that direction. And I think once the financing is organized in a manageable way, it also facilitates affordability of home ownership. You'll also find that it has to be an entrenched system, policy arrangement, that vertical construction now becomes the norm of the day within the high density areas. And it should be part of the planning of the approval, part of the approval, that the developer declares how much green space they are going to leave within the individual plots of houses. As I've indicated, absence of green spaces creates a direct challenge how to evacuate the runoff when it comes. So it should be part of the approval requirements that we have more green spaces declared within the plan arrangements. And also, we have to have more innovations around alternative approaches to construction. Because as we have seen, even the 2.2 million, we shall eventually build them at some point, plus the 284,000. But the question is not whether you develop them. The question is how soon will you develop them. If it is not soon enough, it means that every year you are accumulating the problem. So today we are talking about 2.2 million. Next year we shall be talking about a multiple factor. So this means that we have to have new innovative methods of construction. But these innovative methods have to be well regulated. There have been some very intensive discussions about the method which the Honorable Minister of Works put a stop, the steel, timber, concrete method. The promoters, of course, argued that this was cheap. But you see, they made one fundamental mistake. They did not work with the regulator. They did not work with the professional bodies to give them the second eye before this rolls out into the market. And of course, with some of the challenges, some workers, once they learn a few things from the concept developer, then they now feel they are professors of the method, and they want to go and do it on their own to the unsuspecting public. So that's why we must make sure that innovation is well guided, so that you do not have an innovation which is causing problems. And last but not least is that what should be the focus of promoters of new approaches to housing designs? Should we be promoting concepts that focus more on individual houses, or we should be talking about concepts that reflect how communities will live together? Because the individual approach fails to take into consideration the interconnectivity amongst different players. And then in the long run, when these settlements now build up to form communities, you find that certain service levels have been compromised. So it now becomes one of the obligations of the estate developers or the people active in estate business, real estate business, that as you engage say the power utility service provider, if you were looking at 50 plots in your estate, it's important to give the utility provider this wide perspective. Whom are you developing for? If you are developing for institutions, if you are developing for mass settlements of active populations, it means that this is a data point which has to be well factored in within the planning of the utility service provider. So in a nutshell, whereas we have a challenge, we are really not in the wilderness. There are significant solutions. What we need to work on is the speed of scaling. The speed of scaling and also the coordination as we do this scaling, so that we move away from working in silos. And we have all along the discussion recognized that there are obligations to individuals, there are obligations to the private sector looked at holistically, but there are obligations which should be shouldered by government, so that we deal with about the five key constraints which have been seen to drive up the cost of housing in Uganda. I thank you very much.
So wonderful presentation. So what we're going to do is try and dive into what Engineer Andrew has shared. We have some very intelligent people in the room, and of course also on Twitter we have some people who are joining us and want to hear from you. The hashtag to use is hashtag NBS Housing Baraza. And we've been hearing some things coming from you. We've had a poll running, and here's some of the things that we've been asking you on Twitter and what you have responded to so far at the moment. We were asking about where you are living. Is your house properly designed by an architect? And so far, 35% of the people saying yes, 47 saying no, and 17.5% saying they don't know. And that in itself should be a problem, right? For you not to know whether your house was designed by an architect or not. So it would be good to hear from you what you think about that. Do check us out at NBS TV on Twitter and share your thoughts. You can tag me as well at Ben Winner so we can pick up your things easily using the hashtag NBS Housing Baraza. We also have a question from Patrick Opejo, and this leads us into our next session. Patrick is asking, good morning, NBS Housing Baraza. He says, I earn less than 2 million shillings per month. Can I own an apartment? And if yes, what kind of advice can you give to such a person? And what payment plan can such a person have that would favor him in this economy? He says he's really interested and wants some solutions. So based on what Engineer Mwozi has shared and some of the feedback we're getting on Twitter, what we're going to do briefly basically is go around the room and try and provide some solutions. So what I'm going to do, and this is going to be on the fly, allow me to get up off my seat and move around. I hope that's okay for our crew to be able to track me, is put everyone in the room on the spot. I'm going to turn you into experts. Good to see Peace Kabunga, who is our Executive Director at Housing Finance, one of our big partners. You're very welcome. Thanks a lot for joining us. And we'll be hearing from her as well. So we've got some tables. I've got a table at the back, a table here, a table there, a table there, and maybe these can work together. And so each of you is going to have to find a problem and then solve it. We're trying to find solutions, right? How do we partner to house generations? So you find a problem. From what we have heard from engineers' presentation, some of the issues we have to deal with, government bureaucracies, how do we fix that? Do you guys want to take that on? How do we improve government inefficiencies to solve this problem? Yeah. I see there's already a leader on that table. You are appointed. You have taken that job already. And then on this table, can we talk about the question we've just had. Somebody saying, I earn 2 million shillings, right? I want a house. I need you guys to find a way of making sure this person can get a house at 2 million shillings. So that's your problem. You solve that, right? For that person. And then for you guys, because you have a lot to do with money, right? How do we make sure that we are solving the financing situation? Because that's obviously one of the things that Andrew talked about. So in terms of innovation for housing, what do we do to improve the issues to do with financing? And then on this side, and I think you guys can work together, can we talk about what he mentioned regarding environment and physical planning and climate? So let's combine all of those. We've had the issues of where our friends in Nigeria are being told that they're living in a slum that's glorified. How do we improve that glorified slum going forward to make it a bit better? Is that clear? I hope that sort of makes sense. And of course, if you're joining us on Twitter, do share your thoughts. You can give us some questions, hashtag NBS Housing Baraza, and get in touch. Whatever questions you have, whatever suggestions you might have, you can be able to share those with us, and we'll pick those as we go along the way. So do share those. And because we are live on TV, what we're going to do is we have to do this in real time. So we don't want to waste too much time. So I'll be coming to the back of the table, and we want to hear how you guys are thinking in real time, and then we'll go around to the different tables and then get some thoughts. And so to the guys who are handling let me start, I think, with the guys who are handling the issue with government inefficiencies, because that's probably the biggest problem, right? That's like a really, really big problem. And so what you guys are going to do is actually think in real time. So I'm going to, in real time. So I'll give you a microphone. You take lead of the discussion, and then as you discuss, the rest of the room is following even as they talk about the things, and then we'll go to them, and then go pick up from them and start. So I'll hand over to our self-appointed chair lady, who will introduce herself, and then take you guys to pass on the microphone, ask what you're doing, your thinking is, and we pick it from there.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Rachel Navasike, work as a planner, policy research and innovation, National Planning Authority.
See, I even chose you prophetically. You work with the government. If you could please stand so that we can make sure that we are tracking you properly on TV. Thanks, Rachel. Yeah, please go ahead. Let's keep going. And then, of course, I see discussions already happening on some of the other tables. We keep making fun of the government that they're not doing anything. Now we are putting you in charge to find these solutions. Let's see what you can be able to do with this. Okay, Rachel, let's go. What are you thinking?
Thank you very much, Ben. Now, one of the issues that we can use to ensure that there is efficiency, it is through joint planning. We should stop planning in silos. Let the private sector, the government, and all the players be involved into the planning process. With this, we are in position to know what the government is thinking, what the government is planning, and we are in position to act accordingly. Secondly, we think there should be digitalization. Let us go digital. Because all these processes will be in position to be fast-tracked if everything is done online. We shouldn't be going in person or to Ministry of Land to get titling. Let us do everything digital. If there is a possibility, we can have maybe a one-stop center where we can do everything in regards to land or the housing ecosystem. Then we also need to enforce strict laws. Some of our laws need to be revised a little a bit. And also to ensure that there is sensitization. There are processes, but people are not aware of these processes. If you know that you need this particular document when you're going to title your land or when you're going to certify your product, somehow that can ease the process. So you know when I go to URSB, I have to have this and this in order for me to do this. So there is need to also involve the media. You know the media plays a very big role. So as we do everything, both the government and the private sector, let us use the media, let us use the radios, let us use the televisions to create awareness and also to be in position to know what is happening. I think that is it, Ben. Thank you very much.
Right. So please keep discussing. We want to hear some more thoughts from you. So we'll come back to you to check what else you've been able to come back with on your table. So we'll come to that. So Janet here, how far have you guys gone with finding a house for someone who has 2 million shillings? What are you thinking so far on this table?
Thank you. So I'll summarize our conversation. For someone who's earning 2 million shillings, we think, first of all, the first and easiest thing is to just have targeted savings. Of course, there's different reasons people want to own a home. There's different factors that affect them, like, are you in a rural setting? Are you in the town? What's your family size? What are your obligations daily? So everyone, we really implore people to save, and targeted savings is a good way. But as far as the 2 million, just going off the different partners and conversations we've had here over the last 2 days, Housing Finance Bank has that Zimba Mpola loan, which sounds like a good, of course, I'm not going to speak on the details, but that's something to look into. Then with NSSF, we have, we'll be launching Rent to Own, where you would have to qualify for it, but it would allow you to make smaller incremental payments. You put a down payment and then smaller incremental payments over 10 years. So someone of 2 million shillings has a few more options. They need to just educate themselves a bit on what's there, or we need to market it, but there's options. Yeah, that's a short summary. Oh.
If I may just add, thank you so much. At Habitat for Humanity, here in Uganda, a majority of the people whom we have supported in this country, nearly almost maybe 150,000 are in those category of people who earn 2,500,000 and below. Those are the people whom we are targeting as Habitat for Humanity. And even we have gone into developing options with the young people in this country. We call them climate resilient technologies, where we have trained about 2,000 young people across the country to be able to build using the local resources, soil stabilized soil blocks, which are more climate adaptive. And with these, we can get a house at about 15 to 25 million Uganda shillings. If that gentleman or lady can save for about a period of 3 years, he will own a house. And so please, we encourage you to continue engaging with the different stakeholders. You will definitely get and own that home. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I'll be coming back to you to get some more thoughts in terms of what you guys are thinking. Right. What solutions do you?
Thank you so much. My name is Engineer Magembe Kenneth, and in our group here, we are going to talk about physical planning with the environmental sustainability. And we all know very well that when we do not take care of Mother Nature will never take care of us. And the issues of environment touch each one of us. Now, we realize that our environment is increasingly degrading, and we are responsible for this. And in our group here, we think that for us to find a solution to be able to maintain environmental sustainability, we must use the systems thinking, where there are a number of factors that contribute to this. But by far, we all accept that government is our father, and it's supposed to guide in how environment is supposed to be protected. And if government does not do that, because none of us, at the end of the day, can be able to determine how we are going to protect our environment. However, having said that, there are professionals who are experts in ensuring that every development that goes on is done in a sustainable manner. And it is very important for all developers to respect that and use professionals in environmental science to be able to do that. And then secondly, government has put in place institutions that are meant to protect environment, for example, NEMA. But the challenge that we have is the culture of most of the government institutions. What are the values that are held there? Why is it that even with all the policies that are in place, some developments continue to go on and violate all the environmental principles? So it's very important to also find out, with all these policies, and how comes there is no enforcement to stop such development? So it comes back to government. And then also there is need for awareness programs to the general public, for people to know that if we destroy our environment, it's like cutting a branch that you're standing on. Tomorrow, Mother Nature will come back to us. And unfortunately, it's generations in future that are going to suffer. So there is need for introspection as people, but then government has to take a central role. Issues to do with patriotism. When you're developing, do you take care of the environment outside you? My president talked about individual development, that over time, there will be no interconnectivity between the different developments. At the end of the day, I think this is where, as citizens, we need to come up and proactively realize that if we do not do something about this, then tomorrow we will not be able to safeguard the environment. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. Let's come here, and then you guys have some thoughts as well. We'll come to you, and then as we get ready for Anna.
Yes, good morning, everyone. My name is Jerome. Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Jerome Daga. I'm from the Innovation Village. We're talking about solving problems in the housing sector. So I want to specifically speak about entrepreneurs and people out there who have ideas to address issues, especially regarding climate-smart solutions that can be adapted and integrated in the housing sector. So specifically, at the Innovation Village, we are keen to work with entrepreneurs who are developing ideas in prop tech, that is property technology, which is basically the use of information technology, IT, to basically help individuals and companies research, buy and sell, and even manage real estate. So we are keen to basically work with entrepreneurs who are developing solutions around that sector to address all the daunting challenges around climate change that are also affecting the real estate industry. PropTech is similar to the way fintech works, in a way that it focuses on the use of technology and the use of finance to use digital innovation to address solutions. So we're keen specifically for entrepreneurs who are in that sector and are developing solutions around the housing sector. So you're welcome at the Innovation Village to basically think with us, to basically design, build, and even finance those solutions so we can scale them across the country and be able to reach the last mile as we're discussing in this convening. So specifically, around climate smart solutions, we are keen to work with entrepreneurs and partners in that sector, and you're very welcome to work with us at the Innovation Village.
All right, thank you very much. Obviously, you can see there's a lot of brains in this room. The future is bright for this country if we keep thinking like this. Are you guys...
Yeah, on our table, we're talking about the urban poor, because we know there are quite many in the city. Yes, we were talking about the urban poor on our table, and we know that there are quite many in the city, and most of them are actually living in the slums. And on our table, we agreed that we need to deal with first things first, and that is we need to get these people into employment. We need to get them to be able to earn an income so they can afford even a mortgage, in whatever form it is. Even when you talk about affordable mortgage, I need to have the money to actually afford that affordable mortgage. So one of the things we thought about is if government working with the private sector can get these people into collectives or cooperatives, they can then be transformed from small enterprises into more viable economic business units. and government can guarantee, or even the private sector can guarantee a market for whatever these collectives or cooperatives will be producing. But also, we can have public works where a majority of these can actually be engaged so that they can begin to earn a decent income. And once they begin to earn a decent income, then you can talk about massive estates within the city, which then they can be able to pay, because what ordinarily would have been paying for rent, they could actually be able to pay to own that apartment. Even if it is for 20 years, 30 years, so long as there's stability, someone can even pay as little as 100,000 a month, because if it's a mortgage over 30 years, over 40 years, they can actually pay 100,000 per month. But what that will do, it will guarantee ownership, it will guarantee stability, and a whole lot of other multiplier effects that come from owning a house or owning a property.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lutwa. I'm actually sort of preempting some of the things that we'll need to be talking about from financial sector deepening, and we'll be having you on the panel as well. Did you guys? Yeah, you're the most important table in the room at the moment. You're at the front, so you better have the best ideas.
Thank you so much. I'm Agnes Kabajuni from Minority Rights Group International, and I'm glad to be here. So for us here, we are the finance people, and we looked at our discussion through the human rights-based approach, which focuses on accountability, participatory, non-discrimination, and equality. And also we looked at it from the government obligation, that the government have an international obligation to fulfill. That does not mean delivering houses to people, but creating an environment where people can finance housing. And then we looked at the area of question of affordability, accessibility, and availability in the lens of leaving no one behind, and therefore talking for the urban poor. So we said that financing housing should focus on budgeting housing, and that begins with the National Planning Authority looking into availing resources in terms of finances, basically on housing. So what does that do? We said that government should invest in housing cooperatives, where this again focuses on the urban poor, but it could also focus on the rural poor. And that means mobilizing communities into cooperatives, housing cooperatives, to be able to avail resources for housing, but also government heavily investing in those cooperatives, but also connecting financial institutions into giving soft loans into these cooperatives, because they can provide a collateral as a group. We again talked about alternative and innovative loans. Yes, from the finance, the loans that are affordable to the marginalized people, that most people don't have the capacity to acquire loans or pay back loans because they don't have sufficient collateral. But also some communities are not homogeneous. They are marginalized and vulnerable communities, like the women, like people with disability, like minorities, that need special attention when it comes to accessing finance. And this is the government's role again to invest into, they should be talking to financial institutions and subsidizing to ensure that loans are affordable and financial institutions are pro-people. Then we talked about investing in low-cost housing. You remember the national housing in the past used to have low-cost housing alongside those mega housing projects, so that the low-income earners, especially the working class, can be able to afford house at a low cost, including mortgaging. So our next point was focusing on investing in mortgaging, because mortgaging provides house paid over time. And that means the working class or the low-income earners or the housing cooperatives can actually purchase houses over years. And that one should be made available by subsidizing to companies who can invest. Otherwise, companies want to invest in mega housing projects. But for you to entice them to focusing on the poor, you must provide that kind of subsidy. Lastly, we said government, because they have a primary responsibility to protect, respect, and promote the right to adequate housing, they should be in position to provide for extremely vulnerable communities in the interest of leaving no one behind, which is a sustainable development agenda principle, by providing actual housing to the extremely needy. And those are people with a disability, extreme communities that are living in extreme poverty. So that was our provision.
Thank you very much. You guys have some really brilliant ideas, and I'm so proud of you. So we'll come back to you eventually. This is the discussion that's just starting. But just to get some more insights on this, I'm going to hand back to Arthur to pick up on this. There's a couple of things that Engineer Muhwezi pointed out. I should point out, in case anyone doesn't know if you are following us, our keynote presenter this morning for the masterclass, Engineer Muhwezi, is in charge of the Gabakatosi works. So he's one of the most important people in Uganda right now as far as water is concerned. I think he deserves a big hand clap just for making sure that they're trying to get us water available. He mentioned some things that caught my attention. 20 mechanical engineers in the whole of Uganda that are licensed and registered to work, right? That are available in the building. 20. 30 electrical engineers. That's a very, very disturbingly small number for a country that, that we're looking at. But these are the discussions that Arthur is going to be picking up on as we have a panel discussion for now. So Arthur, over to you.
Pleasure. Thank you. And really enjoying the conversation in the room. And for those who are joining us online, again, it's to encourage you, to please join us on Twitter. The hashtag is NBS Housing Baraza. Please share your perspective, your views. Would love to get in your perspective as well. So please join me in welcoming some key thoughts that we're going to have today. The panel is a connected ecosystem. We're building on the conversation we started yesterday. We've started this morning to now understand how do these pieces start to come together. I was excited to hear Engineer Andrew's presentation where he talked of the building, the BIMS, many acronyms there, Building Information Management System, as one of those kinds of initiatives that is trying to connect the ecosystem. I also enjoyed the little drawing that had UBOS in the center. How do we interconnect data from multiple sources? So to that end, we want to bring some key voices that are catalyzing interconnection across the housing value chain. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Dennis Tugume, who is a board member at the Physical Planning Board, and pleasure, and is also a senior planner in physical and spatial planning at National Planning Authority. I'm also excited to invite a good friend of the NBS Housing Baraza, Mr. Robert Otim, who happens to also be the National Director for Habitat for Humanity. We have Joseph Lutwama, a good friend of the financial sector and of the work that we do here at the NBS Housing Baraza. He happens to be the Director for Programs at Financial Sector Deepening Uganda. And last but not least is to invite the Executive Director, Housing Finance Bank, Peace Kabunga, who has walked this journey with us from the very beginning and herself is a housing juggernaut. So it's a pleasure to have you team today. Karibu. So as our panelists get here, what we're really keen to unpack today, it's anchored in our conversation from yesterday where we're saying, what can we do radically different so that by 2030, we're putting 1 million Ugandans into decent, modern, affordable housing per annum. And it's possible. So that's why we've convened some very unique voices here today that are going to delve into this conversation for us in some detail. We're asking ourselves, how can we encourage partnerships across the entire housing ecosystem? But also to reflect on what's that lost opportunity where we don't work together. And yesterday, a lot of this was touched on, where we had key developers in the room who are sharing some perspective. So today, we really wanted to unpack this well and understand that, okay, aside from that lost opportunity, when we work in silos or work independently, what can we pick in way of inspiration from some of the examples that these organizations and the leaders in them have already been doing to try and create a new way of working together, right? So very, very excited to have the panel joining us today. Each of these is a unique player in that housing ecosystem. So I think we'll start with some introductions from each of our panelists. Dennis, do you want to tell us a little bit more about your work at National Planning Authority, how that plays into trying to catalyze this ecosystem in the housing value chain? Over to you.
Thank you very much. Dennis Tugume, is my name. And as indicated, I work at the National Planning Authority, and I'm a program leader for the Sustainable Urbanization and Housing Program under the third National Development Plan. I'm glad to be here to discuss pertinent issues on housing, which is a fundamental human right, but also, as we were told from yesterday, it is not only a human right, but it is also a meaningful strategy for socioeconomic development, given the multiplier effect that housing comes with.
Fantastic. And from NPA's perspective, I have a feeling you are part and parcel in shaping this policy paper. What were some of those key things that, from your perspective, are really helping to move us forward in that urbanization question? What are some of those key things that you then had included into that policy paper?
Well, thank you very much once again. Looking at the topic that we are talking about today, a connected ecosystem, and the presentation that engineer Mhueza has given us, it has been very spot on. And that's what exactly we are doing in the National Planning Authority under the third National Development Plan, but also that's what we are pushing for in the policy paper on affordable decent housing. For instance, what I got through that presentation today is about the silo approach to doing things. And as NPA, we advise the government that under the third National Development Plan, we need to move away from the sector-wide approach to planning to program-based planning, with the idea of ensuring that we can be able to synergize and leverage complementarity between different players. One, to avoid duplication, but also ensure resource efficiency, as well as proper coordination of different interventions. So we are moving along a program-based approach to planning, budgeting, and implementation. We are bringing together different players to deliver, for instance, on the housing deficit aspect. And to achieve that, you know, we have programmatic approach, and the different MDAs are responsible for implementing these different programs. And in this regard, the Ministry of Land, Housing and Urban Development is the lead implementing agency. So we formed what we call program working groups, where different players convene to agree on key priorities given the resource what? Yeah. The resource envelope. And in those program working groups, of course, the technical leader is the PS, the permanent secretary. And on board, all those who contribute to interventions are part and parcel of the program working group, including the private sector, including the development partners. All the support, development support from the development partners have got to be aligned to the program goals, objectives, and interventions. So in that regard, yes, we are trying to pull in the same direction, other than implementing in the silo approach, where we, of course, all of us know, we live in this city like Kampala, you see disconnection in terms of different players. Today we make an asphalt road. The other day, another agency comes to provide a certain service, and they distract maybe the newly constructed infrastructure. So the program approach is supposed to address those kind of aspects. We know that, well, the private sector is leading in terms of housing delivery, of course, with individual also self-built efforts. But government is also trying to put in place that enabling environment to ensure that the private players and individuals can actually be able to access housing. For example, in terms of laws, policy, and strategies, we have got, for instance, the Fiscal and Planning Act 2010, which declares the entire country planning what? A planning area. Just recently, we have had the National Fiscal Development Plan, which is supposed to provide a spatial framework for development planning in this country approved by Cabinet. So we don't have excuses in terms of us not following these development frameworks. When we are discussing the NPA paper, we observed constraints, development constraints along the housing value chain, for instance, beginning with the land. But the government is also not sitting behind. Government has, for instance, decentralized land titling processes through the establishment of 22 ministry zonal offices. If you're in Karamoja sub-region, you can access the services in Moroto. If you are, for example, in Kigezi, you can access the services in Kabale. If you are in West Nile, the services can be accessed in Arua. If you're in Acholi, Gulu is the center. If you're in Ilango, Lira is the center, and several others, to try and improve the process. Of course, we might have challenges here and there, as the paper indicated, in terms of human resource and capacities, etc., but some effort in that regard is actually being made. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you. So there's a lot to unpack there, and I think we're going to take some time to understand this a little bit more in some detail. I'm excited to understand what Program Working Group does in the context of the national planning area, or the country being designated as a planning area, and what opportunities that has in there in terms of how it's influencing how we shape and implement that. But we shall be coming back to you shortly. Robert, is Habitat for Humanity a member of the Program Working Group that Dennis is telling us about? If not, what does Habitat for Humanity do in this conversation? How are you working together with other sector players?
Thank you. Absolutely. I'll speak to that. Yes, we are a member of this working group. And let me start from a point of gratitude. NPA, I don't know whether we still have doctor in here. In this country, if you've been very close to the sector, if you've been passionate and engaging with this sector, I certainly believe that this research that we are unpacking today and yesterday is the first of its kind in this country over the last 20 years. We need to applaud NPA for that leadership and guiding the sector in that very holistic way. Give them a shout of hands. This is, it's excellent research, and I do see that it brings us a lot of opportunities to be able to steer the sector forward. If we do not pursue some of the recommendations that are coming from this research, some of the solutions that have been proposed, and some of the engagements that we need to pursue collectively in this country, it will be a lost opportunity for us as a sector. So NPA, you have set a pace for us to be able to drive the sector collectively. Number two, I would also like to applaud NBS team under the Next Media. You have been very consistent with this Baraza over the last 4 years. I know we have been a part of this in one way or the other, but that kind of passion, that kind of commitment to put resources, to provide a platform for the sector to dialogue, for the sector to co-create, for the sector to think, is a huge opportunity that we need to recognize. And I think we deserve to give you a hand of applause for that as well. And very lastly, having the participants both in here and online, you have committed to listen to these conversations. And I think for us, that is very, very important. And we need to take this forward as we go along collectively as a sector. Now, just to quickly talk about Habitat for Humanity. We are a network, a global network of institutions, organizations across 73 countries in the world. And we have a bold vision that is keeping us connected, a world where everyone has a decent place to live, a Uganda where everyone has a decent place to live and thrive. And what caught my attention, and we shall unpack later more, is the focus of this Baraza. It's totally speaking to our theory of change. Our theory of change compels us to design programs differently, to think and implement programs differently, to relate with other partners differently. And three key concepts are central in our strategic plan and that theory of change. One is the housing ecosystem. As a country, as a sector, as stakeholders, to what extent do we understand and embrace our housing ecosystem. Even as Habitat for Humanity, we know that we're a premier organization in this country, leading especially in housing for those that are less privileged. But we need to step back and ask a question. Do we really understand the Uganda housing ecosystem? It's an area that Habitat for Humanity is committed to work with stakeholders to unpack, to do thorough research about Uganda's housing ecosystem, to help us pave way to address the growing housing deficit in this country. The other aspect is about people-centered development. Our theory of change holds us accountable to bring people to the table. The people that we serve their views must be listened to. We need to check with them. Is the house that you need going to fulfill your desires in terms of your human right to housing? So participation of people in housing is very critical. Next media, this is a very important platform that you're giving to people. We need to check in the future to what extent are people engaging with this platform that we are offering. Then the third one is about systems thinking. I applaud some of the colleagues that have already shared with that. That is very critical. Integration of our programming. Many times we are looked at as Habitat for Humanity, we build walls and roofs. No, we are a holistic organization that is addressing issues around affordability, issues around habitability, issues around basic services, water, hygiene, and sanitation, issues around livelihoods, issues around climate change adaptation. Those are critical in what we are doing in Uganda. If you go to one of the communities that we have just built a home, we have empowered a young person with skills to be able to support those families. So we are looking at a holistic approach in terms of our interventions in the housing sector. And in the country today, we are commemorating our 40th anniversary. This year we are commemorating our 40th anniversary. We have been in the country for now 40 years. And we have at least partnered and collaborated with stakeholders to build and improve over 200,000 homes across this country. But looking at the data, 200 is what this country needs every year. But the sector is only able to provide 60,000 every year. What does that mean? Of course, it's a drop in the ocean. Habitat has been here over the last 40 years, only 200,000. But 200,000 is a significant transformation in the lives of over 1.4 million Ugandans in this country. Arthur, should I leave it at that for now?
I think that's 200,000 is not humble, sir, but very well done.
Thank you.
Maybe that's actually a broad spectrum of experience over 40 years that we can tap into, and at a scale where you've been able to identify certain systemic challenges, right? So maybe what are some of those key bottlenecks that you've noted in this period?
That's a very good question. And I am sure yesterday that was the focus. We unpacked some of the key bottlenecks in this sector. And the research that NPA has pointed out does bring them very clearly. Now, I would like to speak to a few of them. One of them, which is really the theme or the focus of this conversation, is sector coordination and alignment. Indeed, it's very true. We are now working with the CSO, Shelter Settlements Alternative, which is an umbrella that brings all the civil society organizations together. We are trying to unpack this. The research has been ongoing from August, and it's in the human settlements around the urban areas. We are doing it in 3 divisions. And I invite us, before the end of this year, should be 8th and 9th, we are going to have a dialogue where we are going to share these findings from this research. It's going to unpack some of the issues that the urban poor people are facing in terms of participation, in terms of climate change, in terms of basic services. And so basic services are direly in need in this country. The supply is always almost constant. The needs in these settlements is so huge that we can't imagine what it is. And of course, it comes with a lot of challenges. COVID-19 It's still here, of course. We have Ebola. And all the basic services that we are experiencing down in Kamocha, in Kaso, those areas, it's so huge. So basic services, the demand is not matched by the supply. Back to the issue of coordination. It is a missed opportunity if we do not get to work together. As a sector, Uganda, we deserve to have collective action, collective impact in this country. Arthur, I was going to speak to you that you have done an amazing job with the Baraza. The real estates have recently organized a forum, The government, together with other civil society organizations, organized recently the National Housing Symposium. These are platforms that bring stakeholders together. And I've been wondering, I even drew some kind of sketch that I was thinking that probably we need to think about. Can we at one point think about doing this together jointly as a sector? Imagine that the Nation Media Group joins we have the Buganda Media Group, we have all those media groups come together and think like the way the next media is thinking. What kind of voice are we going to cause in this country? What kind of discourse are we going to create? We will cause a serious movement in terms of how to influence policies, how to influence change and mindset across the country. So I am welcoming all of us to begin thinking, how can we do this together? Government has already challenged us during one of the undertakings during the National Housing Symposium. Challenged us, can we form a committee that is going to steer the National Housing Forum in this country? And we can do this together in a whole lot of weeks, and we can cause very, very long-lasting impact in this country. That's a conversation that I invite us to continue discussing. And then, of course, there are issues around tenure security. Conflicts that are emerging from tenure security. We have seen they talked about it. I don't need to dwell on that. But that is complex in this country and is increasing the costs of construction in this country. Conflicts. We have conflicts, displacements. Uganda is a refugee hosting country. It doesn't come with challenges. It poses challenges. We know that some of the foreigners have occupied lots and vast of land in this country. I don't want to be quoted, but these are issues around tenure security in this country. And of course, the bulging youthful population that is not very productive in this country. We are looking at that as a timing bomb. It is very important for us as a country to begin ensuring that we interest the young people. For instance, Habitat for Humanity, we would like the young people to see the housing sector as an employment base for them. So far, we have trained young people, about 2,000 across the regional youth hubs that we are having. They are now self-employed. They are able to support their families. We have done research across the world which shows that for every one home that we build, up to 6 people will get decent jobs. Now, take an example. If this country is able to inject 200,000 homes, how many jobs are we creating for the young people in this country? So that is an issue that we need to deal with outrightly. Otherwise, it's going to be a timing bomb for us. Of course, we also know that housing is very critical for economic recovery in this country. If you look at the GDP from our nearing neighbors, Kenya is around 24. Rwanda is about 22 or 23. Uganda is where? About 11 or even below. So this is a very important sector that can provide government with revenue. Yesterday we heard from URA. They are looking forward to begin tapping into the opportunities that come from this sector. So it is important we intentionally start to invest as a government to this sector because there's a lot of latent opportunities and potential that we have in this sector.
I think Obugalo, because that was very, very good kind of wrapping up of the different elements and how they play in. The one that has really, really caused the tension to this issue is you've pointed on two critical issues. One is these young people that we have who are becoming underproductive or are not yet productive to the level they could be, and yet these are the customers of this housing that needs to be furnished today. The second issue that really touched on me is that there's an opportunity to restart the economy or to accelerate the growth of the economy through a vibrant housing sector. So very, very important item there. Perhaps it's a good point, Joseph, for us to then try to take a perspective from one of the key sectors that is an enabler of housing or an effective housing market, which is that financial services sector or the financial ecosystem. Please help us appreciate, first of all, what does financial sector services do to catalyze activity there? And how does that also touch on the housing sector? And then maybe we can unpack it from there.
Yeah, it is. It's a pleasure to be here. Just a bit about ourselves. Yes, Joseph Lutwama, I'm Director of Programs at Financial Sector Deepening Uganda. We are a non-profit and we are focused on making financial markets work for the poor. So this is a very dear subject to us. And I would want to begin my contribution by looking at a quote from a research that was done by a gentleman called Hernando de Soto. He wrote a very interesting book, which I think everyone here should be able to read, because it touches on a lot of things that we're discussing today. He was asking himself a question: why does capitalism work in developed countries like the US, the UK, and most recently the Asian tigers? And why does it fail in countries like ours? And he zeroed down on one possible solution to that puzzle: disorganized real estate. Disorganized real estate. And they did research, and these are just estimates. This was done in 2000. They realized that when you look at all real estate developments in the developing world, it's not that people don't have houses. They do have houses. It's not that there's no real estate development in the developing world. There is real estate development. The only difference, it is not organized. And they try to attach a value to that real estate development. And that includes the shack in Kasokoso, the upscale house in Kololo, the grass-thatched house in maybe Chamtakasa, somewhere in Masaka or wherever it is. And they came up with an interesting figure of $9.3 trillion at that time. Of course, if in today's figures, that will probably much, much, much bigger because of inflation. And they realized that that figure collectively was more than the market capitalization of listed companies in the biggest stock exchanges around the world. Those are companies that actually control the global economy. When you combine their size, it's not anywhere near the value that is within our shacks, the grass-thatched houses in Chamtakasa, and the houses in Kasokoso. Of course, plus a few big houses in Kololo. And they say that that is 46 times any development assistance we have received, whether from the World Bank, from any of these donors. So meaning that we are seated on a gold mine. We are seated on a gold mine. And you can see this is the state of housing in Uganda. I picked some figures, some images of Kasokoso. I picked some images of Katanga, and maybe some of the upscale developments that are coming up in suburbs like Kololo and Naguru. And then the skyline of Kampala. You can clearly see even what you call the most developed are also disorganized. And when you look at the rural areas, there's a lot of sparse land that is undeveloped. The other interesting statistics, in the rural areas, almost 80%
of the population in the rural areas, which makes up almost 70% of the population in Uganda, each one of them owns some sort of holding. They own some sort of holding, even if it's on a chibanja or whatever it is. They own some. It is only in the urban areas where most people have to rent. Now, that is how disorganized our real estate is. But when you combine the value in that real estate, it's enormous. Now, then how does financing come in? Finance, I say, is just but an enabler. It's not an end in itself. I know most times we usually say that access to finance is a problem. But I want to make a proposition here that access to finance is not the problem. Access to finance is not the problem. What the problem is the ability for us to be productive. Money in itself is of no use until it is exchanged for value. The 50,000 shillings in my pockets only becomes valuable when I exchange it for something. And that's why when you earn money at the end of the month, if you're earning, maybe you're working for Next Media, the next thing you're going to do is to look for a supermarket, right? To buy something, right? That's only when your money becomes valuable. So meaning that until people begin to create value, then money will not be a problem. The reason why banks cannot finance our projects, because there's no value they are providing. But if there's value they are providing, you will not run short of people looking to finance you. Because so long as you're providing a valuable product, you don't need a profit. People are going to come flooding to buy and access that product because they need it. That's why financial institutions exist to serve people who have money. That's why they're called financial services providers. They're providing a service to those people who have finance. So if you're going to solve the problem of access to finance, then it begins with enhancing the productivity of our populace. And that's where it begins. Those people in Kasokoso, the border guys, they wake up every morning to work and they earn something. The question is, are they optimizing their productivity? How can we harness their productivity? The border guy wakes up every morning and gets onto the stage. He's waiting for the next passenger. If he's lucky, that day he's going to probably get 5 or 6 or 10 passengers. But he's sitting on a gold mine. The guys in Next Media, they need to transport goods every day. They need to move goods from one place every day. And they're paying a lot of money to maybe truck loaders, to truck drivers and all those different things. The question is, how can you transform those so many border guys into a viable logistical company? You get them to form a collective, and then you give them tenders to transport logistics across the country. In that instant, you've moved them from idle guys on stages to very busy guys, because at every other time, goods have to be moved from one place to another. You've instantly given them a predictable cash flow, which my colleague here is very interested in, if he's going to give you money. So if I know that these guys have a tender and a contract for the next 10 years to distribute goods and services within the city, and for every day they earn 500,000 shillings, it becomes much easier for me to finance a real estate development of massive estate housing in Kampala, and instead of them paying rent in some funny shoddy thing in Kasokoso, where they're paying 100,000 every month, they can actually pay that for a decent apartment for a mortgage of 30 years or 40 years. In that instant, you have unlocked not only the capacity for that border guy to own property, because she will tell you that most of the loans are backed up by real estate in whatever form it is. Whether you're running a business, usually you have collateral. That is either in form of real estate development. Initially, you can take a mortgage for a residential house, but she will tell you that you can actually do equity release. As the value of the house increases, you can leverage that same house to start a business, to raise capital to start a business. That's how the developed markets have actually been able to go to where they are now. Because almost everyone owns a house. Yes, they take out a mortgage for 30 years or 40 years, initially to be able to have a decent housing, a decent place to stay. But as they go along, they're able to release equity in that property to be able to finance a whole sort of other different economic activities, which unlocks a multiplier effect in the economy. But it all starts with empowering that border guy who's living in Kasokoso to become more productive than they actually are now. So that's why I believe that it's very, very, very important to not just look at these things in isolation, but to take a holistic approach to having this problem. In fact, if we can solve the housing problem, then we'll probably have solved 90% of our economic problems.
That's substantial, and it alludes to the conversation that we're having earlier around the fact that most of those are young people. It's an urgent issue. So maybe to help us appreciate, what are some of the ways in which the financial sector has tried to communicate that opportunity to the housing sector? And has that conversation started to gel?
Unfortunately, we're yet to make sufficient strides. Yes, I do appreciate financial institutions have tried a lot to come up with innovative products. And I believe my colleague from Housing Finance will be able to share some of the things they're actually doing. But like she'll tell you, the last time I looked at statistics, I don't think we have more than 10,000 mortgages in this country. If there's been an improvement, probably we could be around 20,000. But that even still is very, 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 considering that the backbone of any economy is real estate. Everything is driven by real estate. The reason why people cannot access capital, because they don't have ownership. And the easiest thing that can ensure and guarantee someone to pay back is real estate. One, it will inject discipline. Because if I know that my house is on the line, I cannot play around with money I've got from the bank. I'll make sure I'll do everything possible to pay. Otherwise, my guys are going to be thrown out on the street the following day if I don't pay. And the banks don't joke. I think we've seen in the newspapers. Even for the richest guys, they don't have mercy for anyone. They'll just money for the low-income guy. So it injects discipline, which translates into higher productivity in the economy. So, like I said, financial institutions are just there to enable, but they're not going to instill productivity. That's not their core business. So until the other actors are able to solve those things, then it becomes very easy for her to release capital. Because capital is there. Like I said, we are seated on a gold mine. In the developing world, that's close to 9.3 trillion. Now, potentially, it could be 20-something trillion that they will be dying to unlock if it is organized and they can actually be able to clearly see where it is. But you cannot clearly see where it is if it's still organized as Kasokoso. You cannot. You cannot. Until the other actors are able to solve that puzzle, then finance will no longer be a problem. It will no longer be a problem. I know it sounds much easy, but in real world it's more complex because getting all those different actors to work together and have a common vision is not a ball in the park. And that's why we really applaud the National Planning Authority to begin to take the baby steps towards that vision. Yeah.
No, thank you very much. And 9.3 trillion is a substantial number. That's a massive opportunity for the economy, as you're quite rightly mentioning there. What's extra exciting for me is if you look at just the border sector that you mentioned alone, there's easily more than 2 million of them across the country. And if you just organize them, I like your example around the ability to just have predictable income of $500,000 that you can document and someone can audit. What kind of opportunities would that create, Peace, from a banking perspective? And how are you as Housing Finance Bank already trying to take a step to reach this massive opportunity that is there in our communities today?
Thank you very much, Arthur, and thank you so much for having me here and for organizing these conversations. I'm glad to be here. I'm so passionate about housing, so housing really is something that I breathe, I eat, I love it. And I want to thank NBS for this 4th edition. Housing Finance Bank has been part of this journey for 4 years now. And so it's exciting and it's good to know that we are working together to take these conversations to another level. I'm going to talk briefly about Housing Finance Bank because people think we are national housing. So Housing Finance Bank is a commercial bank regulated by Central Bank, Bank of Uganda, and we have 3 institutional shareholders. The first one is Government of Uganda, which owns 49.2% shares. The second is NSSF, which owns 50%. And the third is National Housing and Construction Company, which owns about 0.8%. So we are proud to be 100% indigenous. We are proud to be owned by Ugandans, and we've been at it for over 54 years. And we continue to grow, and we continue to work with Ugandans to bring this housing need a reality for many of the Ugandans. Now, this conversation is very critical. And ladies and gentlemen in the room or those who are viewing, if we think that we are neglecting this housing, then we are mistaken. And I'm going to talk about 3 things that we must all worry about. Number 1 is the economy. So we might think that housing is a challenge for the small income earners, the vulnerable groups, but housing, it has been proven from research that housing contributes greatly to the economic growth. And of course, when the economy grows, we all benefit as citizens. And in Uganda alone, the housing sector contributes about 11% to GDP, which is about 12 trillion Uganda shillings. And so we must all worry about the economy and know that housing contributes greatly to the economic growth. Number 2 that I want to speak to is health. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a link, and this is research. There is a strong link between housing and the health of the individuals. And if you want to prove this, think about COVID. When COVID happened, they said, lockdown, go to your homes. Now, those who did not have housing, very good houses, think about what happened. And maybe that's why most of the infections were coming up, because people are squeezed, maybe about 10 people in one room, and you're saying wear masks, you're saying do not interact. How does that happen? And of course, what impacts your neighbor definitely impacts you. You saw that COVID was not sparing anybody, the rich, the poor, the middle income earners. So health is very critical when it comes to housing. Number 3, ladies and gentlemen, that we must worry about is environment and climate change. And when we talk about environment and climate change, someone can say, selfishly say, I am here and maybe for the next 15, 20 years, I will be gone. Why should I care? That's very selfish. We are having children, we have neighbors, we have friends. We are Ugandans. We are looking at the global climate change. Everybody must be concerned. And when we talk about climate change, from research, the energy-related carbon emissions housing contributes about 40%. I was looking at the back of this platform, and I saw the burnt bricks. Think about constructing a house with burnt bricks. Do you know how much energy goes into that? You have to bring firewood, burn the bricks, get the guy to transport, you know, all that is carbon emission. So how do we think about, as we are worried about housing, how do we think about climate? How do we bring solutions, sustainable construction solutions or materials that will be able to address this housing challenge? So for me, those three areas are very critical, even before I start talking about finance. Because if people are not healthy, if the economy is not growing, and so people don't have income, if we are, losing our, carbon emissions are going up, there is no sustainability, then why should I talk about financing? So it's very critical. I wanted to raise those three areas and then go to financing and what Housing Finance Bank is doing to address the financing challenge. Number one, we have been doing mortgages, the traditional mortgages. And ladies and gentlemen in the room, when I talk about a mortgage, you are all comfortable. You know what it is. But when you talk about a mortgage to a border man, that's intimidating. That's complex. They don't understand it. They don't. And this is why a mortgage, you must have security. You must have collateral. You know, you're talking about stable income because a mortgage takes about 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, like he mentioned. Now, you talk about a border man, talk about a mortgage to a border man who is earning a daily income. They don't know whether they'll survive next week. They don't know whether they'll get a customer the following day. And you're talking a mortgage for 10 years, for 30 years. That is news to them. They do not understand it because of that reason. Now, as housing finance, because we've been doing traditional mortgages, we looked at the mass. We looked at Ugandans. We did research. We said this mortgage is for about 2% of the population in Uganda. Yet, the housing needs are massive. And the needs are not so much here in the room. The needs are somewhere else in the masses. And then we said, okay, so what do? We developed a product. And this product, I'm sure you heard about it. It's called Zimba Mpola Mpola, incremental building. So this one touches everyone because we can lend 200,000 Uganda shillings to about 50 million Uganda shillings. If you want about 50 million, then we can talk about a mortgage. But those people that we are targeting, the border men, the vendors in the market, you know, they are talking about incremental. That is the language they understand. I have bought a plot, dinakabanja wano, I want to build a house. And then maybe they have built one part of the house and they need money, maybe to complete the other part. So we are saying we can walk the journey with these customers to be able to realize their dreams. And we have done it. A number of people can testify. The other day we were talking about a border man who is servicing 2 loans. He has a loan for his motorcycle and he has a loan for housing from Housing Finance Bank. So you can see this gentleman, after 4 years, he's going to own a motorcycle, he's going to own a house. And what that means is that he's going to use the assets that he has to make more money. So that is one of the big interventions that I can talk about. The other, because that one speaks to individuals. I like today's, or for this Housing Baraza edition, the theme of collaboration, the ecosystem, working together. As Housing Finance Bank, we have been working with different partners, different developers, and we finance the developers, and those that have their own money, we assist or we support them in the off-takers. Because when you put up houses, you need to sell them. Now, the people that you want to sell them to do not have ready cash. Ladies and gentlemen, if someone asked me to buy a house of 100 million, 150 million, right now, I don't have the money. And I'm sure there are many Ugandans who are like me. They don't have that money. So when the developers put up the houses, then we finance the people who are interested in buying those houses. I heard someone say they earn 2 million, they want to buy an apartment. Now tell me, if you're saving from 2 million shillings and you want to buy an apartment of 150 million, how long will it take you to save? A very long time. But if you come to the bank, we can say, okay, maybe we can give you 50 million or 70 million, and then you pay it up in 10 years, 15 years. So we are working with developers as well to be able to support the developers to create demand for the houses that they are putting up. So those are some of the interventions that I can speak to right now. But as a bank, we are ready. We are looking for partners to give us finance. We are looking for developers. And the other area that I mentioned, climate change, housing finance is on top of this. We've actually been working with organizations like IFC. IFC was in the country, I think like 3 months ago. They trained us on greenhousing, and we invited our developers, the partner developers, and they were talking about ways they can put up greenhouses. So you can see that we are not just interested in finance, but in the climate as well, climate change, and ensuring that we finance sustainable projects, sustainable houses.
Wow.
Thank you.
No, that's amazing. And what a holistic view. I liked how you built it on from those 3 fundamental elements before even the bank comes in to offer the solutioning. But there's a common theme here that I'm noticing, is that an efficient housing system is directly linked to a productive economy. And I'm liking how you're building these solutions that are speaking to, even motivating these young people to become more productive. This has been a rich conversation. I think at this stage it would be good to maybe take a question from the team that we have here in studio with us. We also do have people joining us online via the hashtag NBS Housing Baraza. Please keep your questions coming through. We will have an opportunity to address those. But for now, let's take a question from our audience here. I'll ask my camera team to help me with the roving mic so we can get this done. But maybe as they come through with the mic to the table here at the front, from an NPA perspective, the feedback you've had today, is it reaffirming some of those core assumptions you had about if we actually organize this sector in an effective way, there's an economic opportunity towards Vision 2040? Are you seeing that kind of linkage today?
Very true. This is reaffirming the findings of the NPA paper, and of course also the NDP3 goal, which is about improving household income to improve the quality of life of Ugandans. And once we improve household income, in a way, then we are directly enabling the mass line to be able to afford these housing solutions that we are speaking to.
Amazing. No, thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll take the question now. Yes, please. Ben, over to you.
Can I suggest, in the interest of time, that we try and make sure we keep our questions and comments to less than 35 or 40 seconds, because we have to go into our next session, and we need to finish on time because being Friday, here at Next Media, we're an inclusive organization, and so for those who are joining us, of course, online will know this. We have Juma prayers at 1 p.m., and we actually have a special session with an imam on our wellness center on the 4th floor. As for the people who are here in the building, so that's why we must make sure we finish in time. So please be mindful of that.
Thank you very much, the panel. Mine is a very quick one, and my name is Patrick Tumene. About Zimba Mpola Mpola. It's a very good concept, well developed and thought through. My question is, at what interest rate do you give these individuals? Because much as there is Zimba Mpola Mpola, however much little you give, even if it takes 10, 15 years, as long as the interest rate is extremely high, there's a problem. what's the role of government still in terms of subsidizing that interest rate? Because that remains the biggest problem and challenge in the financing institutions. Because as long as your interest rate is 20 and above, 18 and above, still very few people will afford it, and you are really addressing a smallest minority group that will be accessing your loans. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, panel. My name is Donald Wasake, and this is a question to Housing Finance Bank and to our moderator. It's about risk. I personally, I have a company and we are into affordable technology-enabled housing. I have a product that can cut the cost of housing by 40 to 50% if utilized and used properly. However, there's been a challenge of finance from the banks because of the risk that comes with it, and too many of the number crunching, the nitty-gritty, and then obviously to the engineering board, which will need to do massive verifications on this. So overall, my question is, one, in terms of risk tolerance for new technology, is this available? And on national TV right now, can you commit that you can be able to look into this, give it a chance, and give it a pilot study and look into this? Because you're talking about the deficit of 2.4 million houses, but all the strategies which are there are conventional. Are you willing to take the risk on national TV right now with a new product which can cut things by 50%? That is what I'm saying.
I think you don't want to put people on the spot like that. It's very, very dangerous. But also, cutting by 50%, what are you using, grass? I would need to interrogate this technology very, very closely before we can commit, because that sounds like a Nigerian scam, you know, to be able to do. No, seriously, so it's a discussion we'll probably need to pick up on, though, but if there is technology that's that much, I think we'll definitely want to hear that. So we'll take maybe one more, if there is any, before we, okay, fine. So I thought we'll wrap up with the panel now.
Great. I think they started with a question related to the cost of the financing to the end user from the Zimba Mpola perspective, and I liked that question around, you know, is there an opportunity for government to come and do some de-risking support or any other kind of intervention that could potentially help even further lower that? So perhaps over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those questions. My friend here from NPA will tell you that there's a lot of discussion happening in the government circles to try and address so many challenges to do with housing, not just financing. And one of them is really to support Housing Finance Bank to sort of discount the loans that go to the individuals and to others in the housing sector. But for now, the discussions are going on. I will not commit. But what I can say, generally speaking, the cost of finance in Uganda remains a challenge. Yeah. And so many reasons. First of all, when you look at our saving culture in Uganda, is very, very poor. Yeah. Now, I was talking to some friends who live in the Netherlands, and they told me, when you put money in the bank, you get negative interest, like you pay the government. You understand? So meaning they have a lot of capital that is out there, so you should be able to invest that money instead of keeping it on your bank account. But then Ugandans, we are not, so banks are struggling to raise money because remember, we don't have our own cash. Yes, there is capital that the shareholders have invested, but we rely on depositors, we rely on savings to be able to lend. Now, if the savings or the deposits do not come through, what do? We turn to the development finance partners. For example, the French Development Agency, European Investment Bank, and they give us money, they lend us money. Now, this money comes at a cost. It doesn't come at 5%. If I was getting it at 5%, ladies and gentlemen, I would lend it at probably 10%. This money comes expensively. Minimum about 12%, 13%, 14%. Some have given it to us at about 15%. Now, if you borrow at 15%, Mr. Tumwine, tell me, in order to pay back that lender, at what rate will you give it to the person who is taking the money? So that's the biggest challenge, but I'm glad that at NPA level, Ministry of Lands, they are picking up this conversation and they are saying, what can we do to try and reduce the cost? Because I know they have done it for agriculture, like the agricultural credit facility is at 12% and several other sectors. So there are discussions happening, you know, around housing to be able to discount the rates. On the technology, sir, I must say that as Housing Finance Bank, we are actually looking for partners that can walk with us the journey of providing affordable housing to Ugandans. When we started the Zimba Mpola Mpola product, we lost some money because we were learning. It was a learning phase. We lost some money. But, you know, as we went on, we kept picking lessons, refining, getting better. So I can say that after this meeting, let's have a chat because we are looking for partners. We are actually looking for developers that can put up affordable houses. You heard that the media, I don't know if NPA shared the numbers. The income, average income in the village people, the village folks, is about 168,000 per month. The city dwellers, it's about 200,000. So meaning such people can only afford a house which costs between 12 million to about 24 million or 30 million. So sir, the question to you is, are you able, with that technology of reducing the cost by 50%, are you able to put up that house and convince Ugandans that the house will stand for 15 years, 20 years, 30 years, and it will serve its purpose? So we are looking for people like you, brilliant men and women in Uganda, to provide solutions. And the bank, I can tell you from here, we can have a discussion and see how to take this conversation forward. Thank you.
That was the commitment he wanted. So I think as we wrap up, I'll give an opportunity to each panelist to leave us with a nugget of wisdom, and it can be in response to any of the questions that have been raised. But, you know, over to you, just very briefly, and we'll start with you, Robert. Yes, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I just wanted to pick the last question. Habitat for Humanity, through our Center for Innovation in Shelter and Technology, it's called the Teweliga Center, has a program across the world whereby we support upcoming entrepreneurs. Recently, we held the first Africa Housing Forum, whereby even we had some Ugandan companies who were recognized. We have, it was Kampala International University provided a solution where they use cassava to make a floor in a house. It's a technology that we are still going to follow up. And Earth Enable is one of the organizations also using, not using cement for making floors in this country. And so I would like to appeal to you, for Habitat, we are committed. And last week, we had all these entrepreneurs come together in Nairobi to share their technologies. We do this every year, and we would like to, in the next Uganda Housing Symposium, we are going to recognize some of these upcoming investors in housing. So let's have a side conversation later on. But generally, just to wrap it up, Mr. Arthur, these are rich conversations that we have noted today. For me, my parting shot is that we should stop talking and we should start doing it. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you. Over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Arthur. I think my parting shot is around calling upon all of us to work together and to stop the blame game of, blame this sector, blame government, blame. It's a journey that we must walk together, and to say that failure to tackle the housing challenges is not just for one stakeholder. It is failure for all of us. So let's work together and see how we can address this challenge, and we must disrupt this housing sector. I like this gentleman by saying, I have a technology that can reduce the cost by 50%. These are the conversations we must think about. So in order to address these issues, we must allow to disrupt the housing sector and come up with ideas and solutions that can transform this sector completely. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Joseph, over to you.
Like everyone has said, I think to take all of us to realize this dream. And for me, it really begins with enhancing the productivity of the masses. Because until they can earn a decent, predictable income, it will always be almost near impossible to finance them. For my belief, that's where it starts. And one of the biggest stakeholders in this, unfortunately, it's government. Government has to invest in housing. Because once they invest in housing and they look at it as an investment, then most of the challenges that we're facing in this country around the economy and everything, once you solve the housing problem, you'll have solved 90% of our economic problems. That's why I think it's even wise to actually borrow so that you can actually invest in housing. That border man, if he begins to stay in an apartment, his mindset, his outlook to the economy will totally change. But so long as they are still living in a shack, their esteem and all those things will counter together to make it difficult for anyone to do something productive in this economy. Initially, it may cost a lot of money, but the rewards will be enormous. The issues around tax base and all those different things will be solved once people are in organized settings, they're beginning to do organized work, formal work. It will no longer be difficult for even URA to collect taxes. But so long as people are sleeping in slums and they're building their small units wherever they are, very disorganized, it always be very difficult for even URA to smoke them out and get taxes from them.
Indeed. And they actually pointed that out yesterday. Asante sana. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Arthur. From my side, I think this fourth housing Baraza has been really very fantastic. It has been informative. But my take is that for us to reduce the cost of housing, we have got to ensure that we plan in a coordinated and integrated way along the entire housing value chain. From the side of NP, I must say that we have had good inputs from all the discussants from yesterday and today, and that is going largely to improve on our paper, but also inform the Minister of Lands, Housing and Urban Development, which is in the process of preparing a cabinet memo arising from all these contributions on the same aspect of addressing a decent and affordable housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, this has been our team unpacking a connected ecosystem and the importance of that. We've had some very unique perspectives around the importance of these different pieces that constitute an efficient housing ecosystem. Up next will actually be a small masterclass just to kind of unpack it from an innovation perspective. What are some of those radical things that we can begin to do, or how can we start to think differently to begin to create deliberate action that connects the actors here, for example. So very excited about this. For now, we'll just have a very brief break that then prepares us for that next session. Thank you very much to our panelists. We appreciate you. Asante sana.
There is a whole industry of creatives that are not technology-based, let's say. People who are carpenters, builders, welders, artists, carvers, girls who just do content in general, but then intersects with it directly. So motive just seems like the next, just don't know who they are until they are in a group of other people who do the same thing or something similar.
Brown Street takes sustainable materials, for example, pallet wood, and repurposing shipping containers.
We chose containers particularly because they're part of the story. Ideally, if you're talking about storage as warehouses, containers are the biggest example of storage units, especially for moving large amounts of goods across borders, across oceans. So it just made sense for us to use containers. Also, because they are pods, they're easy to lift into a space and then move out at any one point if you never need to change the use of the space. You can stack 100, 200 containers on top of each other without a problem. We saw that they had a structural element. We chose to use them particularly because then you can load them very easily by creating mezzanines over them. So it means if you have a container below, then you can have space above to use.
Well, today we're putting up the container lodges. Just look at them. Look at that view.
Ras Abu Aboud Stadium. What's special about this one is that it's the first temporary stadium in World Cup history. It's made out of 974 recycled shipping containers. After the World Cup is over, it's all going to be dismantled so it can either be rebuilt in a different country as one big stadium or several other small ones.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Prosper Biamungu. I'm an environmental designer by profession, and I run a company called Brown Street Design Build Company Limited. What you've just seen is basically a presentation of what we do. We're trying to do as much in environmental design as possible, basing on what we have seen as problems that have been mentioned by all the previous speakers that you've seen. So we read through the national planning, the NPA policy paper, and we saw all the things that they were talking about, which most of them have been unpacked where we started from, but would like to do a bit of a masterclass about what the actual solutions are and what we can actually do as people to fix some of these problems that we talked about. Mr. Donald Wesake asked about sustainable building and reducing the cost of construction, and we want to see how some of these solutions are being used in the rest of the world. Yesterday, we had a very interesting football match between Portugal and Ghana. It was played in that stadium. That stadium is made of containers. Why they did that was because we're building so many pieces of infrastructure that end up becoming useless afterwards. South Africa built over 10 football fields for World Cup. After the World Cup, only 1 or 2 are being used properly. The rest of them have gone into disrepair. What happens to them after that? So we're looking at the fact that you need to build housing that can be portable. We're looking at mobility. Understanding that cities cannot only stand in one place, sometimes they need to move. You have a lot of buildings that are disused. You have a lot of industrial areas that are not being used anymore because they have been shifted to a completely different area within the city. And you have so many warehouses, you have so many homes that have gone into disrepair and are dilapidated, and they are adding to insecurity in the city, and they are also adding to, more poverty for the people who used to work there, let's say, because then they have nowhere else to move. So we're trying to say that we can use a different method of construction in order for us to deliver something beautiful, something sustainable, and something movable. So that at any one point, we can change tax in case it doesn't work out as we wished. In South Africa, they're using them as homes. High-rise buildings that are put up for communities to create affordable housing for basically the people that we're talking about. These, what we like referring to people as border men and the rest. These guys are like everyone else. They're also looking for work. They're working towards a goal, and they have plans. As long as you give them a proper way of doing things, as long as you give them a platform on which they can give you their views on how they see life, you will find that they can actually get this done. They can buy into projects together. They know how to create all these cooperatives. Taxis, they've done the same thing. People are creating circles. They have financing. They just don't know where to put it. So if we are going to change the narrative on how we look at housing, we need to understand that if you're going to give them dignity, we're going to make them feel better about themselves. You're going to give them the life that they need. Rather than staying in the shacks that we keep talking about, we might as well give them a solution, which is through using, let's say, shipping containers to do this. Box Park in London. I mean, this is a developed country. This is a pop-up shopping mall. These guys go to the councils and then they talk to them and say, we are going to put up a shopping mall that's going to be here for only 6 months. They get the land, they develop it, they make it easy for people to do their shopping, they make it easy for people to interact, they make it easy for people to find entertainment. You're basically making people's lives better by turning something that was just redundant. Especially, you have a lot of government land that's sitting that hasn't been developed. It will be passed on, yes, to someone, maybe, but it's going to sit for a very long time, yet you could have put something temporary that's actually sustainable to generate income for more people, from the shopkeepers to the waiters, waitresses. All these people need jobs, and you have people who can actually afford to put money into this, well knowing that at any one point you're going to move it to another location. Lodging, so this is in Uganda. Basically, that is what we are doing. It's one of the projects that we're working on with Mr. Amos Wekesa. We basically had a conversation about how do we increase the number of rooms in the country, because, I mean, we have a deficit. We have a very big deficit of safari lodges, and the ones that are there are very, very expensive. So tourism is affected by accommodation directly. So how do you figure some of these things out, and how do you finance it? We came up with an idea where we just sat together and said, how about we talk to people and say, if you're buying into this lodge, instead of, let's say, Mr. Wekesa or myself coming up with $1 million to put up a safari lodge, how about we do sustainable construction where I'm building a unit for $25,000. There are 10 units in a lodge. That's 150. That's quarter of the amount to put up the same lodge. Build it in a workshop, lift it, and take it to the site. Makes it so much easier because ideally, when you're building safari lodges, some of the biggest costs are logistics. You will buy a truck of sand, a truck of stones at maybe 200,000. Your transport cost will be $1 million shillings. But if I build this in one place, literally, I am cutting all those costs. Even if I spend on transport, I will still spend $1 million shillings to move this thing from Kampala to wherever it's going. And I will have control. But then at the same time, I will be training people in new ways of constructing or looking at some of these methods of construction. And these are the normal people that we have every day. It's just that they're not exposed to the fact that they can scale. You have carpenters, welders, builders. These are the people that we are taking in places like, let's say, Motive, where you create an ecosystem where they're learning from each other and they're basically able to produce and replicate very, very easily. I can put this in 10 national parks with investment from people, everyday people, without having to go through the hassle of dealing with banks and know that it's a problem. It's just that it's a tedious process. India. That is a skyscraper in India. So, where we look at that unit, we are looking at different sectors. We talked about the fact that some things are important, like medical care. What if we franchised medicine? What if I built a container unit that serves as a medical unit that has a bed, that has an office, that has a lab, that has a pharmacy? And then instead of going to build one in every district by myself, I say, I can give you one. You will just pay for it, and then we can run it for you. So I believe that partnerships with different companies is very, very important because these companies have the expertise in running these facilities. We have the expertise in building these facilities. So we set up a prototype, you make it work, they come in, they take it over, and they push it ahead. We are working with Frontline Medical on this, and we shall roll out probably in the next year. Education. Imagine pop-up kindergartens. Imagine pop-up schools. Imagine just being able to lease land for a very short time and then move there and start an education center. Imagine having these in refugee settlements where you're going to have a problem trying to build permanent infrastructure. By any one point, if you have to move anything, you move it cleanly, you move it into the next spot. If you're able to, if you have an issue in terms of the life cycle of the project has run out, you can basically move this entire thing to a whole different area. Oil and gas, the next big thing. What happens in communities like this is that when you start a factory, when you start an industry, when you start anything, usually casual laborers are going to show up. They're going to come to live there. But then what happens is that they're going to look for cheap housing that's not there. These are in the middle of nowhere. Now you have a chance to be able to build entire communities without having to first deal with sanitation problems that are caused long term after they have moved in. So now imagine if you could produce a number of these different settlements so that when people come in, they are going to rent from you, yes, but then they will move into an organized community. An organized community that can be basically disassembled and moved somewhere else afterwards, or sold off to a different person. I mean, it's the same container, so I can sell it to a safari lodge, I can sell it to a school, I can sell it to, it can be moved around. They are like Legos. So, what I'm trying to say here is that we need to understand that cities are not just about buildings that we have right now. It's a fact that we are always moving. We're a mobile world which keeps changing. Technology changes very quickly. Places, let's say all the estates in Kampala, they started off as homes. Right now, if you look around, they're all offices. They have been turned into offices, and people are moving further and further out because you're creating mobile cities. I do believe that we need to understand that if we are able to work with some of these solutions, we should be able to solve some of the problems that we are talking about. Imagine being able to sell your house, move it away, start over on that property. So that if you live in a space, you're not going to just destroy everything that you worked for 30 years. You're going to sell this thing, it's going to give you some capital to start the next thing. If you're going to put an office building in your place, it will become a placeholder, let's say. This is what I think is a good solution to some of the problems we're talking about. First of all, financing between ourselves, because people have some money. They just need to be directed. I mean, we talked about value. If you give someone value and where to spend their money, they will spend it there. You know? We need to do research, like deep research, and understand that some of the policies that we have right now are not supporting any of the housing needs that we are looking for, mainly because the definition of permanent in this country and in many places is brick and mortar. Isn't a container permanent? It is. It's just mobile. It moves, but ideally it is a permanent structure. And we are solving a very big problem of waste that we are creating. The number of containers in this world that are produced every day, the number of pallets, the number of different materials that can be recyclable that we are dishing out and throwing into all the lakes and all the oceans. Imagine we could do something with that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prosper. There's a very beautiful video showing right now if you're watching. I'll probably give commentary on it on Prosper's behalf. It's some of the container stuff that you have done. I've personally been thinking hard about doing something in this direction with containers and all. So Prosper is going to be my lunch date, so we can discuss how something like this can be brought to life. I think people are usually scared of something like this because they're thinking, when I move the container, my plates break, you know. But also that thing you talked about of, but is that a house? Because, I mean, I want to put bricks. Yeah, you see how they're all giggling. They think like that. Like, I want to know that I have my house. It's there. It's not going anywhere. Isn't it more about how we change the mindset for people? Isn't that probably the most important thing?
I do think mindset change is critical, but you cannot change people's minds, especially our Ugandan people, I'm sorry. We believe by seeing. We use our senses. If I can touch it and I can see it, I can feel it. I know it's real. So after time when you do a proposal, let's say, and say that you're taking it to the bank, as long as you have never seen it anywhere, they will never believe you. So when you say that you can move these things, I mean, in the first video that you showed, I basically made sure that you see when we were lifting them onto site. Because they're just pods, you put them together. You know, you will move your furniture and the rest after, but when it comes to the unit itself, it comes intact, complete.
So they are done off-site, and then you build things in plumbing. How do things like that get sorted? Because I'm also wondering, I don't want my dinner from last night staying for too long. How do you make sure that doesn't become a problem?
They're built in the workshop. We have a workshop at Motive. They're lifted, put inside, placed together, cut, and then we do all the welding, all the fixtures and fittings in terms of the first fix.
Yeah.
So you have electrical wires and wiring done, but then the final lights, those are things that you put on you put up on site. But ideally, all the doors, windows, you build, and then you put the glass afterwards, after you've reached.
And structural integrity is not a problem because, I mean, you showed a picture of a skyscraper. I'm like, do I want to enter that? What if one of the containers falls off when you're on the 50th floor?
Interestingly, where I mentioned the Ghana-Portugal match, there are 30,000 people in that stadium yesterday. These are moving. These are people who are moving. These are moving weights. It's not like a table that you place in one place. These are people who are jumping. They are throwing things.
Yeah, I mean, just look at that. Imagine being at the top and you're thinking, I'm in a container. Again, it comes back to the way we think, isn't it?
Exactly. Because when you're inside it, you don't actually think you're inside a container. You're not looking at it from the outside.
Right.
You're looking at everything from the inside. This could be built out of a container, but you're in a room.
Yeah.
So you have no idea. It's not the feeling that you have. It's just that it's an idea that makes people believe that something is a certain way.
Yeah.
You go bungee jumping. Yeah, but you have a rope.
You know you're safe.
Yeah.
You ask around this room and see how many people would have gone bungee jumping. Show of hands if you've gone bungee jumping. See it. Okay.
And I'm sure it was liberating.
Engineer Muhwezi, have you gone bungee jumping yet? Are you planning to go bungee jumping? You see, so it becomes an issue. Thank you very much, Professor. Let's take some questions. Someone was just tweeting us and suggesting that apparently the reason why Ghana lost is because they were scared that they were inside containers and so they couldn't play well. So, no, seriously though, very interesting. This is innovation at its best. And I think we should give Prosper a big hand clap. This is where we need to be going. Lots of questions that we'll be able to go through. I'll take maybe 2 questions for Prosper if there are any in the room. I see the engineers are already asking the right questions. And then we'll break for lunch. We have a wonderful session after lunch that's going to be focusing on data. And we know how important that is now. So we'll be looking forward to that. So we'll take 2 questions around the room and then we'll break for lunch.
Thank you so much, Prosper, for that technology that you've presented. I just have about 3 questions about this technology. One, in Uganda, I myself am a structural engineer, and for the benefit of the others, I was a structural engineer for NBS, for this entire office. Yeah, you see, when we are designing, we design based on standards and documentations. I'm wondering if we are going to bring that technology and they're going to put up a skyscraper like that, KCCA will request you to submit your designs. How will you go over that hurdle? Secondly, in Uganda, people build incrementally, Zimba Mpola. And they may not be able to build a house all in one go. And according to your technology, you must be able to pay, and the house is built in a factory somewhere and then hoisted there. Are there payment options for someone to be able to afford this and pay for it over a period of time? And then third, normally when we build buildings, there has to be flexibility that there will be change of use. Now, today it's a house, tomorrow it's going to turn into an office. How would that happen? Because ordinarily, it's very easy to break a brick wall and expand and have a usable space. How will you do that with a container? Thank you so much.
All right. So for your first question, where you're talking about getting approvals from, let's say, KCCA, that is a conversation that we need to have. The fact that we need to understand that there's a need to look at all options in terms of construction materials. We are so used to 1 or 2 construction methods to the point that all our policies are basically geared towards that. So if we are able to see that even in the basically biggest economies in the world, they are accepting different building materials and standardizing them, because they're not building, they cannot put up that skyscraper or anything else without council approvals. There's a reason that they are working, that all of these projects are literally working out there. So we need to push that conversation with the councils to understand that nothing, there's nothing new under the sun. But we need to be able to move with the rest of the world. We can't keep hiding and thinking that what we know is the only thing that that can work. Please remind me a second question. It had to do with payment options. Now, one of the things about containers is the fact that because they're built as pods, each one is a different pod. You can increase in terms of building by just doing one pod first, then you bring another one and add it onto that and leave it complete, rather than waiting to first build a whole house and then come and start breaking walls. You can move them as units. You design it as let's say Legos. Legos can go in any direction. You can go up, you can go sideways, and structurally you will find that, again, if for a structural engineer, you find that it will probably make your work much easier, because these things are designed to sit on top of each other on big ships, like very, very, very high tensile stress. Yeah. The third question was about flexibility, and I've just answered it actually in the second in my second answer. The fact that these things move it makes it easy for them to be able to be aligned in different directions.
Yeah. So I have a question, Prosper. I don't know if there's one more question that we need to take around the room, because I have a whole bunch. You're my lunch date, so I'm sure we'll sort out ourselves, because I'm really interested in this thing. The first question on behalf of everyone for their benefit is around heat insulation. Obviously, you're dealing with metal, right? Where in a tropical environment, it tends to get a bit hot.
Yes.
How do you manage that sort of problem?
Okay, so what happens is that for containers, you have to do a layer of insulation on the inside before you put the final finish. The final finish, we've been using gypsum boards up to 12 millimeters. So basically you have 3 layers. What is on the market mostly is rock wool, but we've been using a lot of the insulation that is being used in most of the buildings in town. It works very well. As long as you have enough openings in order for air to circulate, it's manageable.
Right.
Thank you very much for that innovation. But like other innovators, you are speaking to the houses of, say, the formal sector. And the majority of us Ugandans and our extended families are informal. Other innovators, concept owners have faced the same challenge, which, having listened to you, you shouldn't face. The issue of working with the authorities. The Ministry of Works, you're not mentioning anything about it. The engineering, the National Building Review Board, you are silent about it. Should somebody pick it up, like there is already somebody in hot soup about the same good technology, applied longly, and the ministry will put a stop. You shouldn't go that route. I think you should work with the professionals, they set guidelines, and have it in place. It's a good innovation. Like at the Uganda Institution of Professional Engineers, we have a research and innovation center. We can walk through with you on that journey if we understand exactly what you do. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things I actually wanted to mention was the fact that you will never get anyone's attention in this country until you've started doing something. So you start and then you come and ask for forgiveness and say, you know what, let's fix this. But the idea is that you've already seen it, you've already physically understood that it is possible. Otherwise, if you put it on paper, it doesn't matter where it goes, it will end up in a dustbin somewhere. So now that this platform is open, which I actually thank NBS for, we need to have these conversations. I am open to them. I have done prototypes to make sure that people understand that it is possible. So if now we're going to basically start structuring around that, I'll be very open to having these conversations.
Prosper, I've just got a message from a civil servant who, for obvious reasons, has chosen to remain anonymous. Says, please tell Prosper, the government stepped it in Luganda, akubye nnyo. In other words, you've been a bit brutal with the government, but it is the hardest, honest truth, isn't it? That sometimes government bureaucracies mean that they have to catch up with you, right? And if you're waiting for them to get anything done, you'll probably never get anything done. How do you work around that challenge? Because I can see even from just the look on your face that you've probably been through corridors and just been frustrated over and over again. What's been your experience trying to deal with that problem of having to circumvent, or rather, trying to navigate the intricacies of government bureaucracies?
I believe that government is not, it's not a building, it's people. There are people like you, there are people like me. They're just doing a different kind of job. So if you actually sit down with these people and have these conversations and then try to push the innovations through some of their channels, because some of these things we're discussing with, let's say, different ministries to see how they can support some of these innovations. You have innovation funds all over the country. What are we using them for?
Right.
So I don't think it is Sikubia Nyobambi. I just think that I'm mentioning things that are obvious.
Right.
And we all know, but we basically just don't have these conversations mainly because they're difficult. But being difficult doesn't mean they're impossible.
Right.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'll be a bit uncomfortable. We do need to break for lunch. Some very interesting innovations. If you have been following this particular session, would like to know what you think. Would you consider building a house from containers as opposed to your normal brick and mortar, especially once Prosper has made it clear to you that it will cost you less money to be able to do that? Is that something you would consider doing? Do get in touch. Hashtag NBS Housing Baraza. Let us know what you think. We're going to take a break for lunch. But for you, of course, you want to know what else is happening around the world. Victoria Bagaya is on standby in the studio to bring you live at 1, to bring you up to speed with what's happening around here and around the world. And then we'll catch you on the other side of Live at 1 as we talk about data and how it fits into the housing discussion. And that's a very important discussion to have. It's going to be happening after lunch. It's the 4th NBS Housing Baraza. We're taking a lunch break. We'll be back in a bit. Don't go anywhere. Keep it at NBS TV.
Oh, it's definitely something I would consider, a container that is turned into a house.
Uganda Revenue Authority, developing Uganda together.
The luxury of life.
Uganda Revenue Authority, developing Uganda together. Uganda